If you're a shellhead like us, you probably already know that the turtles aren't too picky about which genres to explore in their adventures. They can go from rooftop ninja fighting to space in only one issue. One of these genres is mysticism, and it's been with the franchise since its early years. One of these adventures included vampires, which would later become a thing in the Mirage universe. Having said all that, introducing a vampire character in the next Mutation wasn't really off-brand for the franchise. But the show gave these creatures an Eastern origin, linking the protagonist of today's video to another brand new character in the show. Join me today as I explore the curious story of Vam-Mi. Vam-Mi was a vampire antagonist who, by the time she crossed paths with the Turtles, had been undead for almost 2,000 years. She had many of the attributes of Western vampires, such as blood-sucking and turning into a bat. And while she didn't have weaknesses like religious artifacts or garlic, she could still be killed by exposing her to the sun. Now, I should make a disclaimer. This show was heavily inspired by kung fu martial arts movies. And while the writers tried to bring Eastern concepts into this universe, sometimes they failed to represent that culture well. One such case is the fact that they speak of shinobis and ninjas as if they were different things. Venus, for example, grew up in China and was trained by Chun-Yi, a shinobi master. In the context of this show, a shinobi is like a ninja that has been trained in mysticism. Now that you know what it means for this show, it should make a little more sense that stopping vampires was one of the shinobi's responsibilities. Vam-Mi was definitely evil and nearly indestructible, so Chun-Yi restrained her and extracted her heart, later placing it inside a small wooden box. He then proceeded to close her coffin, where she rested for 70 years under the care of her servants, Bing and Chi-Chu. One day, still in China, her servants woke her up to give her the news that Chun-Yi had died, and her heart was now in the hands of his apprentice in New York. While this was some good news, it also meant that Vam-Mi was racing against time to reunite with her heart or lose her immortality for the last time. The three vampires traveled to an abandoned hotel in New York named the Ambassador, a place where Bing and Chi-Chu had stayed 100 years before when it opened. Feeling her heart nearby, the vampires followed the Turtles, who were about to get ambushed by Bone Steel. Fortunately, Leonardo had learned from their past encounters with him. He began reading everything he could about the art of hunting, hoping to understand his techniques and stay one step ahead. After falling into his new trap, Leonardo recognized his strategy and stopped the other turtles from falling into another trap. This confrontation was interrupted by the three vampires, who quickly brought chaos to the battlefield. Vam-Mi went against Venus in particular, Chun-Yi's apprentice. But Venus had no idea what Vam-Mi was talking about. She was, in fact, in possession of her heart, but it had shriveled so much that she assumed it was some sort of desiccated root. Using his knowledge about traps, Leonardo fooled everyone into falling into Bone Steel's strategy. The Turtles returned to the lair, where Venus was shocked to see Vam-Mi's heart now in full health and ready to escape. After this failed attempt, Vam-Mi tried to use what little they knew to strategize. Clearly, Bone Steel knew how to trace the Turtles, and he wouldn't stop trying to hunt them. So, she sent Bing to spy on him. But this wasn't Bone Steel's first interaction with vampires, and he quickly smelled the spy and sent the 1,200-year-old boy flying back to the hotel. This only made Vam-Mi more furious, and threatened her servants that if they failed to retrieve her heart, she would make sure they die with her. Back at the lair, Venus understood that it was her responsibility as a shinobi to deal with this vampire threat. But the rest of the Turtles didn't think this was their problem. Vampires drink human blood, so they're a human concern. To resolve the situation, they came up with a plan. That night, while Venus was sleeping, Raphael took Vam-Mi's heart to the city, freed it, and followed it to its owner. Once he found the three vampires, he offered to make a deal with them. He would give them the heart back in exchange for leaving his family alone. Unfortunately, the vampires still wanted revenge against Venus, making a deal impossible. To make things worse, Raphael was also under attack by Bone Steel. The rest of the Turtle Boys had to come to his rescue, and were lucky enough to receive some help from a star. And I mean that literally. It was sunrise, so the vampires had to fly away to safety. After crossing paths twice, Bonesteel decided to use his sense of smell to trace the vampires down to the hotel. There, he tried to understand their intentions, hoping to team up, but Vam-Mi rejected him. At the lair, and while the turtles tried to destroy the heart in every possible way, Venus discovered a detailed process to eliminate and prevent bloodsuckers. But, unfortunately, it was in an ancient language that she didn't know very well. After getting bullied by the others, Venus decided to leave the lair with the heart and her scrolls. It was clear to her that the turtles weren't taking her shinobi responsibilities seriously. Being out in the open only made the heart easier to find for Vam-Mi, and the three vampires attacked her. Venus tried to put an end to them, but her knowledge of shinobi magic just wasn't good enough. Fortunately, Bonesteel traced Venus and joined the fight, which also brought Leo into it, as he was also following Bonesteel. Leo helped Venus escape, but Bonesteel took the heart. This led to another confrontation on a rooftop at Bonesteel's camp. The vampires brought fireworks to have an advantage, which would... It could maybe... They would... No, I don't know. I suppose it made sense at the time. By the end of the fight, the turtles escaped with the heart, and Bonesteel finally made a deal to team up with the vampires. For their following confrontation, Venus had finally learned how to use the magic against Vam-Mi. But it turned out that the vampire had way more experience than she did in dealing with magic, and the battle was a complete failure. Splinter and Venus had to escape, and Bonesteel captured the four turtles with the intention of turning them into surfboards. Don't worry, they fooled him into freeing them and they defeated him. At the lair, Splinter finally told Venus that she wasn't a particularly good magician. But this didn't make her unredeemable. Splinter pointed out that Chang'e was a master magician, which wasn't one of Venus's strengths. She was sensitive, psychically attuned, and possessed telepathic intuition. After hearing this, Venus realized that the key to defeating Vam-Mi was in reading the heart's thoughts. Back at the hotel, Vam-Mi was getting desperate, so she invoked the elemental vampire, also known as the Ancient Prince of the First Blood. She asked him to send her directly to her heart, in an attempt to stop the countdown with just a few minutes to spare. The prince sent her, but by then, Venus had been reading the heart's communications with Vam-Mi, and knew what she was up to. The turtles ambushed her in a sewer tunnel, and using a set of mirrors, reflected the sun's rays to turn Vam-Mi into ashes. With Vam-Mi apparently dead, her heart went back to its previous form. Later, Bing and Chi-Chu vacuumed up her ashes and placed them inside an urn. But instead of returning to China, they decided to stay in New York. After all, they remembered having a good time 100 years before. In these last moments, Vam-Mi's screams for help could still be heard from inside the urn. And that was Vam-Mi's only story in the show. Her episodes were memorable enough to produce an action figure, which was released in 1998. Interestingly, her bio doesn't mention blood at all. Instead, she absorbs the life forces, an element of the traditional Zhengshi vampires of China. Her accessories included bat-tail whips and flesh-breaking bat blades. The character was played by Canadian actress and model Kira Clavel and voiced by Saffron Henderson. Yes, just like with the movies, the show had to be dubbed in post. Vam-Mi and her servants appear to be loosely inspired by aspects of Chinese vampire mythology, and as I mentioned before, that seemed to be the original intention. But at some point, the writers decided to go for a more Western version of the creatures. And while Bing is depicted closer to the Zhengshi, Vam-Mi herself has a Vampirella-inspired look. An interesting detail was that Bing also possessed a prehensile ponytail, which he could use in battle. This was inspired by a scene in a kung fu movie where a kid could do the same thing. The 4 episodes titled Unchain My Heart, written by Dan Clark and Michael Mayhew, were broadcast in February 1998. But because of their production codes, they are usually placed just before the season finale on streaming and DVDs. It's unclear who created the character and whether Mirage provided concept art at some point, like they did for other characters. What is known is that the character wasn't included in the Nickelodeon acquisition of the franchise. In fact, all the next Mutation characters changed owners a few times and are now under Hasbro's control. It's for this reason that Nickelodeon avoids using the characters from this show. Writer and artist Sophie Campbell, who also found a loophole to introduce Venus into the comics, also wanted to introduce vampires into the IDW universe. As I said before, vampires were already established in the Mirage universe, and that would have been her inspiration. However, for a brief moment, she considered introducing Vam-Mi as well. But after she found out the character was off limits, she gave up on the idea, and eventually gave up on introducing vampires altogether. Given the short life of this iteration of the Turtles, and how difficult it would be to reintroduce her in another universe, Vam-Mi is destined to become a very obscure character. But, given that we could still hear her screams, even after she turned to dust, do you think there was a chance for her to return in the following seasons? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.